Part 4 of Travels in Lancashire. A Description of the County of Lancaster by Daniel Defoe. Part 1. From a Tour through the Island of Great Britain, divided into Circuits or Journeys. Volume 3, Letter 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. I entered Lancashire at the remotest western point of that county, having been at Chester upon a particular occasion, and from thence ferried over from the Chestrian Chersonesus, as I have already called it, to Liverpool. This town stands on the eastern banks of the river Mersey. Its situation is low, extending along the shore in oval form. On the north side of the town, the country is a perfect flat for many miles. It is surrounded on the east side by higher lands gradually rising from the town to about the distance of a mile, forming on the whole a situation extremely pleasant and commodious for trade. Few places enjoy a more healthy climate or happy temperature of heat and cold than Liverpool. It is screened from the severe easterly winds in the winter by the range of high lands on that side, and the refreshing sea breezes from the west frequently allay the excessive heats of summer. Snow, which falls here but rarely, seldom lies long, nor indeed anywhere upon the sea coast. Frost is not so intense here as in the inland countries. In the hot and sultry months it seldom happens that the atmosphere is perfectly calm, the sea affording that perpetual current of air which is a circumstance of such great importance to the healthfulness of large and populous cities. It must be confessed that the air in general is moister than in more elevated situations, and this humidity of the atmosphere often occasions thick fogs and dry weather in the winter season, but it is very serviceable in spring and summer by affording a degree of moisture proper for vegetation to this sandy soil, which would otherwise quickly suffer by drought. The sea air renders the town so wholesome that though it is exceeding populous and closely built, epidemical disorders seldom appear, and when they do, are of short duration. The soil in and near Liverpool is dry and sandy for 2 miles round. The north shore consists of barren sands for an extent of 20 miles, but between the town and Kirkdale is a fine vale which has a rich marl under the surface, and affords excellent pasturage. This tract of ground was formerly common arable land, but has been many years enclosed. The soil in the neighbourhood of this town is particularly favourable to the growth of potatoes, an article highly useful to the poor, acceptable to the rich, and profitable to the industrious farmer. The cultivation of this excellent root has of late been so much attended to in this county, that the husbandman often depends more upon a good crop of potatoes than of wheat or any other grain. The river Mersey, which may more properly be considered as an arm of the sea, is subject to the variations of the tide. In spring tides the water rises about 30 feet, and in neap tides about 15 feet. The breadth of the river at high water from Seacombe Point to the opposite shore is 1200 yards, from the Pitch House to Birket Point is 1500 yards. Almost all kinds of fish are here in great plenty. * See a table of fish taken and sold at Liverpool, with the prices, etc. fixed, in Enfield's Essay towards the History of Liverpool, p. 7. In November 1565 there were in Liverpool only 138 householders and cottages who then employed no more than 11 barks and a boat. The whole bulk amounting to but 223 tons, and navigated by 75 seamen. Wallasey had only 2 barks, and a boat carrying but 36 tons, and 14 seamen in the whole. About the same time a rate was levied upon the inhabitants by which it appears that only 7 streets were inhabited. Towards the close of Queen Elizabeth's reign, Henry, Earl of Derby, going to visit his Isle of Man, and waiting some time for a passage, at his house in Liverpool called the Tower, the Corporation erected and adorned a sumptuous stall or seat for his reception at church, where he several times honoured them with his presence. The town of Liverpool was, in 1644, as well as in former periods, much indebted to the family of the Moores at Bank Hall, particularly for many improvements in its buildings, both public and private. Its ancient charity school was chiefly built and supported by that family, and some of the streets derive their name from them. The great increase of this town from the beginning of the present century to this time may be in part inferred from the numerous Acts of Parliament which have been granted for building churches, for making convenient docks for their shipping, for enlarging and repairing roads, etc. From these Acts we see the speedy progress of population and trade in this flourishing town, which has been such as to render it necessary within the space of 60 years to make 3 spacious docks and to build 3 large churches. The first observation which a stranger makes upon his arrival in Liverpool is generally, perhaps, that the streets are much too narrow, either for convenience, ornament, or health, and it must be owned that in the ancient parts of the town little attention has been paid to regularity or elegance, and that in general the buildings are so crowded that the inhabitants are much more indebted for their health to nature than to art. The number of streets, lanes, alleys, etc. is about 230. A design has been formed, and is now executing, of erecting several new streets at the south end of the town, under the name of New Liverpool, but how far the scheme will be accomplished is at present uncertain. In 1773 a survey of the state of population was made in Liverpool, when the number of families then resident appeared to be 8,002, and of inhabitants 34,407. The inhabitants of Liverpool live more closely crowded together than in most other towns. In Northampton the proportion of inhabitants in a house is 4 3/4. In Birmingham, according to an enumeration taken in 1770, it is 5 1/9, and in Liverpool 5 4/5. It is probable there is no place in Great Britain, except London and Edinburgh, which contains so many inhabitants in so small a compass. Its whole area, including all the docks, yards, and warehouses, is not so large as that of Birmingham or Manchester, yet it has a greater number of inhabitants than either of them. The comparative state of Liverpool with respect to some other towns whose inhabitants have been numbered or accurately computed may be seen in the following list: London 651,580, Paris 480,000, Berlin 134,000, Amsterdam 200,000, Liverpool 34,407, Birmingham 30,804, Norwich 24,500, Leeds 16,380, Shrewsbury 8,141, Manchester. Footnote: an enumeration of the number of inhabitants in the town of Manchester is now carrying on, and it is supposed will prove to be larger than has been late supposed. Liverpool is one of the wonders of Britain, because of its prodigious increase of trade and buildings within the compass of a very few years. Rivalling Bristol in the trade to Virginia and the English colonies in America, they trade also round the whole island, send ships to Norway, to Hamburg, to the Baltic, as also to Holland and Flanders, so that they are almost become, like the Londoners, universal merchants. The trade of Liverpool consists not only in merchandising and correspondences beyond seas, but as they import almost all kinds of foreign goods, they have consequently a great inland trade, and a great correspondence with Ireland and Scotland for consumption of their goods, exactly as it is with Bristol, and they really divide the trade with Bristol upon very remarkable equalities. Bristol lies upon the Irish Sea, so does Liverpool. Bristol trades chiefly to the south and west parts of Ireland, from Dublin in the east to Galway west. Liverpool has all the trade of the east shore, and the north from the harbour of Dublin to Londonderry. Bristol has the trade of South Wales, Liverpool great part of that of North Wales. Bristol has the south west counties of England, and some north of it, as high as Bridgnorth, and perhaps to Shrewsbury. Liverpool has all the northern counties, and a large consumption of goods in Cheshire and Staffordshire are supplied from thence. Though this town chiefly subsists by foreign commerce, and therefore cannot be expected to furnish many materials on the head of manufactures, yet it discovers its spirit of industry and its improving state in this way as well as many others. English porcelain, in imitation of foreign china, has long been manufactured in this town, and formerly not without success. But of late this branch has been much upon the decline, partly because the Liverpool artists have not kept pace in their improvements with some others in the same way, but chiefly because the Staffordshire ware has had, and still continues to have, so general a demand as almost to supersede the use of other English porcelain. The several branches of the watch manufactory, and that of fine files, have long been carried on in this town and neighbourhood. A stocking manufactory has within a few years been established, which employs many hands. 2 glass houses, the salt works, copperas works, iron works, etc., also employ many hands in their several branches. Sugar baking and refining is a business which, ever since the increase of foreign commerce, has been carried on in this place. There are at present 8 sugar houses, in which about 6,000 hogsheads of sugar are annually refined. Public breweries are exceedingly numerous in Liverpool. The whole number is 36, of which 33 are for home consumption and 3 for exportation. It is commented that nearly 50,000 hogsheads of ale are brewed in their public breweries annually, of which upwards of 47,000 are for home consumption. There are, in or near the town of Liverpool, 27 windmills, of which 16 are for grinding corn, 1 for grinding colours, etc., 1 for rasping and grinding dyer's wood, and 1 for raising water at the salt works. To supply the shipping, etc., there are in different parts of the town 15 roperies. Besides these, there are a variety of mechanical trades carried on in this as in other large towns. In Liverpool are 6 churches and 9 dissenting meeting houses. Of the churches, the oldest is that of St. Nicholas, commonly called the Old Church. The time when it was built is uncertain. From its Gothic structure it must, however, be of considerable antiquity. Near it formerly stood a statue of St. Nicholas, to which sailors used to present an offering on their going out to sea. This church affords little matter of curiosity either to the antiquary or architect. Among the charitable buildings in this town is the Bluecoat Hospital, which made its appearance in the year 1709, where 200 children are clothed and educated. Here is likewise a public infirmary, first formed and hitherto conducted on the most liberal principles. The Exchange is conveniently situated, but there is no point of view from which it may be seen to advantage. It is a handsome edifice, built of stone with 2 fronts, each of which consists of an elegant range of Corinthian columns, supporting a pediment and supported by a well proportioned basement. Between the capitals are placed a basso relievo, heads and emblems of commerce. On the pediment of the grand front is a piece of sculpture well executed, which exhibits Commerce committing her treasures to the care of Neptune. The Custom House is conveniently situated at the east end of the old dock, and is a neat brick building, ornamented at the angles and windows with stone. A small flight of steps in the front leads to an open lobba or piazza, above which is the low room, or chief place for transacting the business of the customs with the other officers. Behind the building is a spacious yard with proper warehouses, except that for India goods, which is complained of as too small for the purpose. There are 5 public docks, 3 of which are so constructed with floodgates as to enclose a sufficient depth of water to keep the ships afloat in all times of the tide. The other 2 are called dry docks, because the water is not confined in them by floodgates, The great advantage of these docks can only be seen by comparing the ease and convenience with which business is done at Liverpool with the labour, hazard, and delay which attend the lading and unlading of goods at London, Bristol, and other great ports which have no such receptacles. The boastful length and beauty of Yarmouth Quay, and that of Seville in Spain, are not indeed to be seen at Liverpool, but the latter gains much more by having no part of its quays very remote from the centre of the town, and by affording such an extent of ground on all sides for the reception of goods, than the former by their perspective views. The Theatre Royal in Williamson Square is a large and handsome building, elegantly finished both on the outside and within. The pediment of the front is enriched with a well executed piece of sculpture exhibiting the King's arms. The house is large and commodious, its ornamental architecture and furniture is elegant, the stage is spacious, and the whole is well constructed for hearing. This theatre, which was opened in June 1772, cost nearly £6,000, and was built by the subscription of 30 gentlemen, who received from the managers for their respective shares 5%, and a ticket entitling the bearer to attend every night of performance in any part of the house. Among the public places, the terrace at the south end of town, called St. James's Walk, deserves to be particularly mentioned. It is upon an agreeable elevation, which commands an extensive and noble prospect, including the town, the river, the Cheshire land, the Welsh mountains, and the sea. It is of a considerable length, and much improved by art. Behind this eminence is a stone quarry, which plentifully supplies the town for every purpose of building. Here labour has exposed to view one continued face of stone, 380 yards long, and in many parts 16 yards deep. The entrance to this quarry is by a subterraneous passage, supported by arches, and the whole has a pleasing and romantic effect. There is found here a good chalybeate water, which appears upon trial to be little inferior to many of the spas. Liverpool is a corporate town, governed by mayor and aldermen, and sends 2 members to Parliament. The freemen of this town are also free of Bristol and of Waterford and Wexford in Ireland. Here are markets on Wednesdays and Saturdays, which are plentifully supplied and well regulated. Its fairs are held on July 25th and November 11th. Its streets are tolerably lighted with lamps during the winter season, and in general well paved and kept as clean, considering the populousness of the place, as can be expected. I shall conclude this account of Liverpool. Footnote: the reader who wishes to be informed of more particulars respecting Liverpool than the limits of this work will permit us to give here, is recommended to peruse Mr. Enfield's essay, mentioned in a preceding note. I shall conclude this account of Liverpool with observing that the country about it, including the southern part of Lancashire, formerly constituted part of the kingdom of the Brigantes, according to Richard de Cirencester, a monk of Westminster. In the time of the Heptarchy, the country about Liverpool was a part of the kingdom of Northumberland, the river Mersey being, in the Saxon times, the boundary of the kingdom of Mercia. From hence, the Mersey opening into the Irish Sea, we could see the great and famous road of Hoyle Lake, remarkable for the shipping, or rather rendezvous of the army and fleet under King William for the conquest of Ireland, anno 1689. For here the men of war rode as our ships do in the Downs, till the transports come to them from Chester and this town. Going east we passed by Highfield, the magnificent house of James Kenyon, Esquire, and leaving Fairfield, the residence of John Turlington, Esquire, on the right, we rode through Prescott, a good market town, and came to Warrington, which is situated upon the river Mersey, over which is a large stone bridge, originally built by the first Earl of Derby after his marriage with the Countess of Richmond, mother of Henry VII, in order that the king might pass that rapid river with ease in a visit he made to Knowsley, where he was received in a stately stone building erected for that purpose. The entrance into Warrington is unpromising. the streets long, narrow, ill-built, and crowded with carts and passengers, but further on they are airy and of good width. They afford a striking mixture of mean buildings and handsome houses, as is the case with most trading towns that experience a sudden rise. Not that this place wants antiquity, for Leland speaks of it as having a better market than Manchester upwards of 200 years ago. This town contains 2 churches, with a dissenting and a Romish chapel, besides meeting houses for Quakers, Anabaptists, and Methodists. To these buildings may be added a large academy just built for the improvement of youth and preparing them for trade and merchandise. Besides this there is a charity school where 26 boys are clothed in blue, and their education, with apprentice fees, paid for by a fund left by one Waterson, who got a large fortune by showing for pence a dancing horse. Likewise an eminent free school, where many boys from London and even the West India plantations are sent for education. The River Mersey runs close by the side of this town, and parts Cheshire from Lancashire in its course to Liverpool, where it enters the sea. Here are caught great quantities of fine salmon and smelts, uncommonly large, which in the spring are sent to London every day by the stages. By means of the Bridgewater New Canal, this river is made navigable up to Manchester, to and from which place much merchandise is carried in barges of about 60 tons burden. On its banks are paper mills, gunpowder mills, and slitting mills. In the town of Warrington and villages around it, sailcloth for the Royal Navy is made to a considerable amount, in which, and other coarse linens, it is computed that the warehousemen of this town employ 12,000 persons. Thread and silk laces are wove in this town, and there are copper works, sugar houses, and glass houses, which furnish the industrious with the means of living comfortably. Pins are here made, and malt, remarkable for furnishing the country around with good ale. 2 fairs for all sorts of cattle, woollen manufactures, etc., are annually held, the one beginning on the 18th of July, and the other on St. Andrew's Day. The chief market is on Wednesday, and abounds with corn, cheese, and potatoes, which are here sold in great quantities for exportation. Thomas Patten, Esquire, the proprietor of the copper works, has built at the end of the town, in an elegant taste, a stately dwelling house, the foundation of which is made with the dross of copper. Not far from this town is a place called Ravenhill, where John Mackay, Esquire, has large coal works and a plate glass manufactory, employing about 400 men, and it is said that his glass equals what is brought from France. From Warrington we went to view the Bridgewater navigation of Latchdale, which township is remarkable for the richness of its soil, on which clover and the finest grasses naturally spring. The children there weave bone lace, their mothers spin thread for sailcloths, and their fathers weave it. A new and very elegant church has been just finished here by Mr. Leland the architect, which has induced many of the dissenters to return to the service of the church. Near Warrington is also a village called Winwick, the rectory of which is in the gift of the Earl of Derby, and yields about £2,500 per annum to the possessor, now the Honourable and Reverend Mr. John Stanley, great uncle to the Earl of Derby, who is likewise rector of Bury, worth £900. From hence, on the road to Manchester, we passed the great bog or waste called Chat Moss, the first of the kind that we saw in England, from any of the south parts hither. It extends on the left side of the road 10 miles east and west, and they told us it was, in some places, 7 or 8 miles from north to south. There are many of these mosses in this county. Take this for a description of all the rest. The surface at a distance looks black and dirty, and is indeed frightful to think of, for in some parts it will bear neither horse nor man, unless in an exceeding dry season, and then so as not to be travelled over with safety. The surface seems to be a collection of the small roots of innumerable vegetables matted together, interwoven so thick, as well the larger roots as the smaller fibres, that it makes a substance hard enough to cut out into turf or peat, which in some places the people pile up in the sun and dry for their fuel. Under the moss several large oak, birch, and fir trees are found, from whence it is conjectured that here were formerly large woods, which after falling sunk by degrees in the earth. Near this moss are the seats of Charles Pole, Esquire, and 4 miles further, near to the town of Burton, you have a view of Worsley Hall, the residence of the Duke of Bridgewater. End of Part 4. Part 5 of Travels in Lancashire. A Description of the County of Lancaster by Daniel Defoe. Part 2. From a Tour through the Island of Great Britain, divided into Circuits or Journeys. Volume 3, Letter 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. From hence we came to Manchester, a large and rich trading town, superior to most cities for elegance of buildings. It is covered by the ordinary judicatures of a manor, courts leet, and courts baron, but the greatness of the place makes it requisite that the justices should always be sitting in rotation, for the regulating disputes and the punishing offenders. On this side and on the north the town is bounded by the high rocky banks of the Irwell and Irk. The former is the principal stream, and receives the latter at the north-west angle of the town. But the mass of buildings extends to the lower ground, lying on the western side of the Irwell and forming a distinct township, is called Salford, and though it has a separate jurisdiction and is even the head of the 100, it is merely a suburb to the town, and stands as the little Southwark of Manchester. Both are connected together by a very firm but ancient stone bridge over the Irwell, which is built exceeding high, because this river, though not great, yet coming from the mountainous part of the country, swells sometimes so suddenly that in one night's time, they told me, the waters would frequently rise 4 or 5 yards, and the next day fall as hastily as they rose. The town of Manchester is very ancient. Here was a station in the time of the Romans, which is mentioned by Antoninus, and called Mancunium. The Roman camp was in a field which is now near a mile from the central parts of the town, and is called Castlefield. The rampart is pretty entire all round, and the ditches appear more imperfectly without. The area of the camp is 4 or 5 acres, and is called Mancastle, and the site is naturally very defensible, having a high steep bank of the Medlock on the south, and a steeper bank on the west. Many curiosities have been found here: a Roman ring of gold, a Saxo-Danish ring of the same metal, having runic and Danish characters inscribed thereon, now in the British Museum, and several Roman coins and inscriptions. The town boasts of 4 extraordinary foundations: a college, an hospital, a free school, and a library, all well supported. The college was founded by Thomas La Warr, Lord La Warr, who, being but the cadet of the family, was bred a scholar, took orders, and became rector of the parish, which he enjoyed many years. But by the decease of his elder brother without heirs, succeeding to his honours and estate, he converted the rectory into a college in 1421. It was dedicated to the Virgin Mary and the 2 patron saints of France and England, St. Denis and St. George. This foundation, escaping the general ruin under Henry VIII, was dissolved in 1547, in the first year of King Edward VI. After this it was refounded by Queen Mary, and then anew by Queen Elizabeth, anno 1578, by the name of Christ Church in Manchester, and last of all it was again refounded by King Charles I, anno 1636, consisting then of 1 warden, 4 fellows, 2 chaplains, 4 singing men, and 4 choristers, he incorporating them, as they were by Queen Elizabeth, by the name of the Wardens and Fellows of Christ College in Manchester, the statutes for the same being drawn up by the Archbishop Laud. The visitor of the collegiate church is the Bishop of Chester, and His Majesty King George I having made Dr. Peploe Bishop of Chester, who at the same time was warden of the church, the visitatorial power and the wardenship being incompatible, an act passed anno 1729, empowering his Majesty to be the visitor, whensoever the Warden of Manchester happened to be Bishop of Chester. The hospital was founded by Humphrey Chetham, Esquire, and incorporated by King Charles II, designed by the said bountiful benefactor for the maintenance of 40 poor boys out of the town and parish of Manchester, and some other neighbouring parishes, but it is enlarged since to the number of 60 by the governors of the hospital, who have improved the revenues of it. The said founder also erected a very fine and spacious library, which is furnished with a competent stock of choice and valuable books, and daily increasing, with the income of £116 per annum, settled to buy books for ever, and to afford a competent salary for a library keeper. There is also a large school for the hospital boys, where they are daily instructed and taught to read and write. The most extensive and important branch of the Manchester manufactures is the cotton trade. This is made up into a variety of articles, and has been greatly improved of late by the imitation of the silk manufactories of Genoa in cotton, and by the invention of velverets. Besides the cotton manufactures, the town deals in checks, the second great article of its commerce, and in small wares, as they are called, which consists of filletings, garterings, tapes, laces, etc., and compose the third great article. The small wares have been lately improved by some inventions adopted from the Dutch, as looms that work 24 laces at a time, and several much later, which are kept great secrets by the proprietors, and a silk manufactory has been lately erected, which promises to rival Spitalfields. Vast quantities of these goods are exported abroad, to Portugal, Spain, and the West Indies. In consequence of this trade, the town has gradually become very large and very populous. Here, as at Liverpool, the town extended in a surprising manner. Neither York, Chester, Gloucester, nor Norwich itself can come up to it, and for lesser cities 2 or 3 put together would not equal it, such as Peterborough, Carlisle, and Lichfield. A new church dedicated to St. Anne was built in a style truly elegant about the year 1723 by voluntary subscription. The choir is alcove fashion, and the pillars painted lapis lazuli colour, and several handsome streets were erected in the neighbourhood of it. But such was the increase of buildings and inhabitants employed in trade and commerce at Manchester, that in a very few years it became much more populous than when the last act was made, so that the said 2 churches could not contain the inhabitants of the said town, professing the doctrine of the Church of England. It was thought necessary, therefore, that one other church should be erected in some convenient place within the said town. Accordingly, a neat church was built in 1754, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. But even these were not sufficient. A new chapel was erected at the other end of town, dedicated to St. Paul, in 1765, and another, called St. John's, was built in 1770. From this little account alone we may judge of the increase of the town. In this gay place are people of different religious opinions, Moravians and Methodists, to which may be added a fragment of Roman Catholics, which have just sprung up afresh, and, assisted by the late Duke of Norfolk, have built themselves a place of worship. The non-jurors have likewise built what they call the primitive church, though it is but a small one. The new built houses, which are generally constructed, not by undertakers for sale, but by gentlemen for their own use, are built in a place remarkably good, and are superior to most buildings out of London. The town receives great advantages from the Duke of Bridgewater's canal, on which are brought hither timber, corn, lime, stone, coals, and other heavy articles from Liverpool and different parts of Cheshire. By this means trade is carried on at a small expense, the roads saved, and fewer horses kept. The Leeds navigation also extends to Liverpool, and is very advantageous to this town. There are few towns in the kingdom that have such ample and such various sums bequeathed to the poor as Manchester, and the charity, generosity, and public spirit of the present inhabitants is very great. 11 miles from Manchester, north west, lies Bolton. It is, and has been long, esteemed the great staple of fustians. All the branches of the cotton manufactory are carried on here, and most of the improvements made in that article originate from this place. By an accurate survey taken in 1773, this town was found to contain near 6,000 inhabitants, which have considerably increased since that time. Machines for carding and spinning cotton were first used here, and now much facilitate the general manufacture of that article. Here the old Earl of Derby was beheaded, October 15th, 1651, proclaiming King Charles II. Before we leave these parts it is necessary to subjoin an account of the Duke of Bridgewater's navigation, of such great importance to this county, and to England in general, with a word or two relative to subsequent attempts to carry on inland navigations. In 1758 and 1759 his Grace obtained an Act for enabling him to cut a navigable canal from Worsley to Salford near Manchester, second to carry the same to or near Hollin Ferry in the county of Lancaster. This work was, pursuant thereto, begun, and a navigable canal was made from Worsley Mill to the public highway leading from Manchester to Warrington. But it being then discovered that the navigation would be more beneficial both to his Grace and the public if carried over the river Irwell near Barton Bridge to Manchester, his Grace procured a second Act of Parliament to vary the course of his canal accordingly, and to extend a side branch to Longford Bridge in Stretford. The making a navigable canal over the river Irwell and filling up the hollow or low ground on the north side of this river were esteemed a very arduous undertaking, and by most persons who viewed the chasm thought to be impracticable. But his Grace, being well supplied with materials from his own estate, completed this, which was looked upon as the most difficult part of his undertaking. Upon a farther survey, and taking levels, the Duke found it practicable to extend his navigation from Longford Bridge by Dunham to fall into the river Mersey at or near a place called the Hempstones below Bank Quay, and so as to bring vessels into his canal at the lowest neap tides; and having obtained a third Act for that purpose, undertook it at his own expense, without any addition or increase to the 2s. 6d. per ton given his Grace by the former Acts. Great opposition was made by the proprietors of the old navigation on the Irwell and Mersey, but without success, and the following account of this great and salutary work was published in 1765. At Worsley Mill, 7 computed miles from Manchester, is the Duke of Bridgewater's Tunnel, a subterraneous navigation that leads to the coal mines. The first entrance for 1000 yards is 6 feet and a half wide, 7 feet and a half high, including the water, which is 3 feet 4 inches deep. It is already continued 500 yards further, 10 feet wide, the same height, in a direct line, and will be extended at least a mile and a half more. The boats employed therein are 47 feet long and 4 feet and a half wide, including the gunwales. They draw, when loaded, 2 feet 6 or 7 inches, and carry from 7 to 8 tons. There is a rail on each side by which the boats are pulled along by the hand, and being linked together are brought out of the tunnel from 6 to 20 at a time. A boy of 17 has worked 21, which are 7 tons each, the lowest burthen, make 147 tons. They are from thence drawn by mules or horses to Manchester and other places, generally 4 or 6 in a gang. There is also a mill, that by a small overshot stream turns a wheel 8 yards diameter, and by that power 3 pair of stones to grind corn, and an apparatus complete to make mortar, also portable cranes of an uncommon construction to draw stone out of the quarry with calipers. Near the same place is found a stratum of the quality of lime, which, being mixed with clay and formed into bricks, is burnt, and a very useful mortar is made of it. At Stretford, 3 miles off, is the caisson, 40 yards long by 32, also open bottom boats. Their use is to discharge their burthens of earth, and thereby raise the ground where the level requires it. These are always employed in the caissons, as the ground they pass over lies above 16 or 18 feet below the surface of the canal. They carry about 16 or 18 tons, which is with great ease dropped in an instant where wanted. At Cornbroke, 3 miles further, is a circular weir to raise the water of the canal to its proper height. The overplus flows over the extreme sides into a well in the nave of the circle, and by a subterraneous tunnel is conveyed to its usual channel, also a machine to wash the slack, worked by water. On the side of Castlefield is a large wharf, and a larger one intended to be in the centre of this field, formerly a Roman camp. There is a large and beautiful weir composed of 6 segments of a circle, the whole circumference of 366 yards, which acts by the river Medlock in the same manner as that at Cornbroke to supply the canal. There is a large tunnel in Castlefield under the hill, in which is a bucket wheel 30 feet circumference and 4 feet 4 inches wide, to draw up the coals brought in boxes fixed in the boats, and contain about 800 each, and when discharged are landed where the way to Manchester is so level that a good horse may easily draw 1 ton to any part of that town. I shall subjoin a still more entertaining account in a letter to a lady of this stupendous undertaking. This waits on you with an account of the Duke of Bridgewater's magnificent work near Manchester, which is, perhaps, the greatest artificial curiosity in the world. Crowds of people from all parts resort to it, and persons of high rank express their admiration of it. This is a new canal, and I know not what to call it besides, constructed, as it should seem, to convey coals out of a mine to Manchester and other places, but is capable of being applied to more considerable purposes. This stupendous work was begun at a place called Worsley Mill, about 7 miles from Manchester, where, at the foot of a large mountain, the Duke has cut a basin capable of holding all his boats and a great body of water which serves as a reservoir, or head, to his navigation. And in order to draw the coals out of the mine, which runs through the hill to an amazing extent, his Grace has cut a subterraneous passage, big enough for long flat-bottomed boats to go up to the work, and has so preserved the level that a part of the water which drives a mill near the mouth of the passage runs in and stands to the depth of about 5 feet. This passage also serves to drain the coal mines of that water which would otherwise obstruct the work, and is to be carried on 3 miles or more underground. Having obtained a ticket to see this curiosity, which is done by sending your name to a new house which the Duke has lately built for his residence, at about half a mile distance, you enter with lighted candles the subterraneous passage in a boat made for bringing out the coals, of this form and dimension: 50 feet long, 4½ broad, 2 feet 3 inches deep. When you first enter the passage, and again when you come among the colliers, your heart will be apt to fail you, for it seems so much like leaving this world for the regions of darkness, that I could think of nothing but those descriptions of the infernal shades which the poets have drawn for Ulysses, Aeneas, and your old friend Telemachus. There is more civility, however, in this region than Homer, Virgil, and Fenelon have discovered in theirs, for should your spirits sink, the company are ever ready to aid you with a glass of wine. Even Charon himself will offer you a cup on the occasion. Through this passage you proceed, towing the boat on each hand by a rail, to the extent of 1000 yards, that is, near 3/4 of a mile before you come to the coal works. Then the passage divides, and one branch continues on in a straight line among the coal works 300 yards further, while another turns off and proceeds 300 yards to the left, and each of them may be extended further, or other passages to be conveyed from them to any other part, as the mines may run and the necessity require. Hence you will perceive that those who go up both passages travel near 3 miles underground before they return. The passages in those parts where there were coals or loose earth are arched over with brick, in others the arch is cut out of the rock. At certain distances there are, in niches, on the side of the arch, funnels or openings through the rock to the top of the hill, which is in some places near 37 yards perpendicular. In order to preserve a free circulation of fresh air, as well as to prevent those damps and exhalations that are often so destructive in works of this kind, and to let down men to work in case any accident should happen to the passage. Near the entrance of the passage, and again further on, there are gates to close up the arch and prevent the admission of too much air in tempestuous and windy weather. At the entrance the arch is about 6 feet wide and about 5 feet high from the surface of the water, but as you come further in it is wider, and in some places opens so that the boats that are going to and fro can pass each other, and when you come to the pits the arch is 10 feet wide. The coals are brought from the pits to this passage or canal in little low waggons that hold near a ton each, and as the work is on the descent are easily pushed by a man on a railed way to a stage over the canal, and then shot into one of the boats already mentioned, each of which holds about 8 tons. They then, by means of the rails, are drawn out by one man to a basin at the mouth of the passage, where 4, 5 or 6 of them are linked together, and drawn by one horse or 2 mules by the side of the canal to Manchester or other places where the canal is conveyed. There are also on the canal other broad boats that hold about 50 tons, which are likewise drawn by one horse. Of the small boats there are about 50 employed in the work, and of the large ones a considerable number. Before we quit the coal mines to speak of the open canal and its conveyance, we must take some notice of a mill near the mouth of the passage, and which, through an overshot mill, is so well contrived as to work 3 pair of grinding stones for corn, a dressing or bolting mill, and a machine for sifting sand and compounding mortar for the buildings. The mortar is made by a large stone which is laid horizontally, and turned by a cogwheel underneath it, and this stone, on which the mortar is laid, turns in its course 2 other stones that are placed upon it obliquely, and by their weight and friction work the mortar underneath, which is tempered and taken off by a man employed for that purpose. The bolting mill is also worthy notice. It is made of wire of different degrees of fineness, and at one and the same time discharges the finest flour, the middling sort, and the coarse flour, as well as the pollard and the bran, and without turning round, the work being effected by brushes of hog's bristles within the wire. From the basin we have been speaking of, the canal takes its course to Manchester, which is 9 miles by water, though but 7 by land, the other 2 miles being lost in seeking a level for the water. The canal is broad enough for the barges to pass, or go abreast, and on one side of it there is a good road made for the passage of the people concerned in the work, and for the horses and mules that draw the boats and barges. To perfect this canal without impeding the public roads or injuring the people in the country, the Duke has in many places built bridges to cross the water, and, where the earth was raised to preserve a level, arches under it, all of which are built chiefly of stone, and are both elegant and durable. At convenient distances there are, by the sides of the canal, receptacles for the superfluous water, and at the bottom of the canal machines constructed on very simple principles, and placed at proper distances to stop and preserve the water in case any part of the bank should happen to break down. We turned east and came to Bury, a small market town on the river Roch, which is the utmost bound of the cotton manufacture which flourishes so well at Manchester, etc. And here the woollen manufacture, called half-thicks, freezes, and shags, begins, which employs this and all the villages about it. From thence we went to Rochdale, a larger and more populous town than Bury, and of great traffic arising from the manufactory of baize and the other articles worked up at Bury. It lies in a deep and dark bottom, under the hills called Blackstone Edge, which having mentioned at my entrance this way into Yorkshire, I must now go back again to the sea coast, for I took my course that way up to Preston and Lancaster in this journey, having travelled thus far from Liverpool in my former journey to Halifax, etc., but must first observe that there are on this eastern side of the county, northward of Rochdale, the towns of Haslington, Burnley, and Colne, where there is a weekly market for shalloons, which lie just under the mountains, and likewise Blackburn, where white cotton is chiefly manufactured for the calico printers, and Clitheroe, a little west of them, all which being merely market towns, I shall say no more of them, other than that Clitheroe stands upon the Ribble, is of some note, and sends 2 members to Parliament, and that at Colne and Burnley have been discovered a great many Roman coins. I take Wigan first, in my way back to the sea coast. It lies on the high post road to Lancaster. This town has a good market, and is noted for its manufacture in checks, the cotton manufactory, and likewise for pit coal and iron work. It is 20 measured miles from Manchester. We are now in a country where the roads are paved with small pebbles, for we both walk and ride upon this pavement. The town returns 2 members to Parliament. It is neat and well built. Between Wigan and Bolton, particularly on the estate of Sir Roger Bradshaw, Bart., is found great plenty of what they call cannel or candle coal, which is superior to what is found in any other part of the globe. By putting a lighted candle to them they are presently in a flame, and yet hold fire as long as any coals whatever, and burn more or less as they are placed in the grate, flat or edgewise. They are smooth and sleek, when the pieces part from one another, and will polish like alabaster. A lady may take them up in a cambric handkerchief, and they will not soil it, though they are as black as the deepest jet. Footnote: we are told that the Queen was presented with a toilette table, composed of hexagonal pieces of this coal, each piece set in, and the whole bordered with silver, and made a very elegant appearance. They make many curious toys of them, as snuff boxes, nutmeg boxes, candlesticks, salts, etc. On the same road, a little south, stands Newton, which had once a market, now disused, though it returns 2 members to Parliament. It is noted for a charity school founded in 1707 by one Hornby, a yeoman of the place, but more for 2 great fairs for horned cattle, which are brought out of Scotland and the northern parts of England, and sold here to the drovers who supply London and the eastern counties. On the 2nd days of these fairs are sold horses, etc. From hence we passed to Ormskirk west, towards the sea coast. It is a market town that has a good inland trade, yet is in a less flourishing condition than any of the rest. We saw nothing remarkable at Ormskirk but the monuments of some of the ancient family of the Stanleys before they were ennobled. Not far from this town is Latham House, to which belongs a large estate and a fine park. It is noted for having been gallantly defended in the civil wars by Lady Charlotte, Countess of Derby, who held it to the last extremity against the Parliament forces, which could never reduce her to capitulate, but kept the place gloriously till she was relieved by Prince Rupert. It was, however, ruined in a second siege, and sold by the family to the late Sir Thomas Bootle, who built a magnificent house there, which is now in the possession of Richard Wilbraham Bootle, Esquire. Formby, a village, lies near the seaside in the marshy grounds where they dig turf, that serves both for fire and candle. These marshy grounds extend a great way north beyond Eccleston, and almost up to Preston. On the edge of it eastward is Marton Mere, which has been very large, but much of it is now drained. Eccleston is a small town, where nothing remarkable is to be seen, nor at Chorley, a town which lies a little north east of it. Preston stands next, a corporate mere town, having 3 weekly markets, well supplied and frequented. It is a large fine town, situated on the Ribble. It is pretty full of people, but not like Liverpool or Manchester, for now we come beyond the trading part of the county. Footnote: the Spectator has long since pointed out the knowledge to be collected from signs. It is impossible not to remark the propriety of the reigning ones of this county. The triple legs and the eagle and child denote the great possessions of the Stanleys in these parts. The bull, the just preeminence of its cattle over other counties, and the royal oak, its distinguished loyalty to its sovereign. I am amazed they do not add the Graces, for nowhere can be seen a more numerous race of beauties among that order, who want every advantage to set off their native charms. Pennant's Tour in Scotland. It received its first charter from King Henry II, but though there is no manufacture except that of linen, the town being honoured with the Court of Chancery and the officers of justice for the County Palatine of Lancaster, is full of gentlemen, attorneys, proctors, and notaries, the process of law being here of a different nature from that in other places, by reason that it is a duchy and county palatine, and has particular privileges of its own. It sends 2 members to Parliament. The people are gay here, though not perhaps the richer for that, but it has on this account obtained the name of Proud Preston. Enham walks, a little from the town, command one of the most delectable scenes in England. No lover of nature can survey it without transport. The Pretender in 1745 received the greatest emotions on this enchanting spot. The decisive blow that was given here to the rebellion in 1715 is too well known to be mentioned in this place. The great street is filled with good houses and is very broad. The houses in general are very well built. To this town the gentry resort in winter for many miles around, and here are during that season assemblies, balls, etc., in the same manner as at Chester. Not far from Preston is Ribblechester, commonly called Ribchester, supposed to be the Rigodunum of the ancients, a town which, in its flourishing state, was said to have been the richest in Christendom. So many pieces of antiquity have been dug up in its neighbourhood, that it was most probably a place of great importance among the ancient Romans. Between the Ribble and a little river some miles south of Lancashire, the land elbows out in the form of a semicircle into the sea, and this tract they call the File Lands, in which is a small market town called Kirkham, only remarkable for a good free school which has 3 masters. Poulton is another market town in the same tract, very convenient in its situation for trade, being near the mouth of the river Wyre and the Irish Sea. Here the shore is fine for bathing in the salt water, and very little inferior to Scarborough. From the beach may be seen the Isle of Man. It is frequented by company from distant parts for bathing in the sea, and is a small village 3 miles north of Lancaster. End of Part 5. Part 6 of Travels in Lancashire. A Description of the County of Lancaster by Daniel Defoe. Part 3. From a Tour through the Island of Great Britain, divided into circuits or journeys. Volume 3, Letter 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. We followed the post road and passed through Garstang, which stands upon it, about midway between Preston and Lancaster, and is of no other note than having a market, and so leaving Wyresdale Forest on our right, we arrived at Lancaster, the county town, built of stone, and lies on the side of a hill. The castle, built by Edward III, forms one great object, the church another, and far beyond is an arm of the sea, and the lofty mountains of Furness and Cumberland. The town, though not regular, is well built, and contains numbers of very handsome houses. Every stranger must admire the front of Mr. Noble's, faced with stone, naturally figured with views, rivers, and mountains. The inhabitants are fortunate in having some very ingenious cabinet makers settled here, who fabricate excellent and neat goods at remarkably cheap rates, which they export to London and the plantations. Mr. Gillow's warehouse of these manufactures merits a visit. It is a town of much commerce, and has fine quays on the river Lune, which brings up ships of 250 tons burthen close to the place. 40 or 50 ships trade from hence directly to Guinea and the West Indies, others to Norway. Besides the cabinet goods, some sailcloth is manufactured here, and great numbers of candles are exported to the West Indies. Much wheat and barley is imported. The Custom House is a small but elegant building, with a portico supported by 4 Ionic pillars, with a beautiful plain pediment. Each pillar is 15 feet and a half high, and consists of a single stone. There is a double flight of steps, and a rustic surbase, and coins, a work that does much credit to Mr. Gillow the architect. The castle is very entire, has a magnificent front consisting of 2 angular towers, and a gateway between, and within is a great square tower. The courts of justice are held here, and here are kept the prisoners of the county, in a safe but airy confinement. The church is seated on an eminence near the castle, and commands an extensive and pleasing view. The shambles of this town must not be omitted. They are built in the form of a street, at the public expense. Every butcher has his shop, and his name painted over the door. Lancaster was incorporated by King John, and was burnt by the Scots in a sudden inroad in the year 1322, in the reign of King Edward II. It is governed by a mayor, etc., to whom Edward III. Granted the privilege, that pleas and sessions in the county should be held nowhere but at Lancaster. It is the Longovicum of the Romans, who had a station here. On the steepest side of the hill below the church hangs a piece of Roman wall, called Wery Wall, derived, as Camden thinks, from the British word Caerwyrd, a green city, from the verdure of the hills. Lancaster sends 2 members to Parliament. We next visited a cavern about 5 miles from hence, near the road to Kirby Lonsdale, called Donald Millhole, a curiosity I think inferior to none of the kind in Derbyshire, which I have also seen. It is on the middle of a large common, and we were led to it by a brook, near as big as the New River, which, after turning a corn mill just at the entrance of the cave, runs in at its mouth, by several beautiful cascades, continuing its course 2 miles under a large mountain, and at last makes its appearance again near Carnford, a village in the road to Kendal. The entrance of this subterraneous channel has something most pleasingly horrible in it. From the mill at the top you descend for about 10 yards perpendicular, by means of chinks in the rock and shrubs or trees. The road is then almost parallel to the horizon, leading to the right, a little winding, until you have some hundreds of yards thick of rocks and mineral above you. In this manner we proceeded, sometimes through vaults so capacious we could not see either roof or sides, and sometimes on all 4, from its narrowness, still following the brook, which entertained us with a sort of harmony well suiting the place, for the different height of its falls were as so many keys of music, which all being conveyed to us by the amazing echo, greatly added to the majestic horror which surrounded us. In our return we were more particular in our observations. The lakes, formed by the brook in the hollow parts of the caverns, realized the fabulous Styx, and the murmuring falls from one rock to another broke the rays of our candles, so as to form the most romantic vibrations and appearances upon the variegated roof. The sides, too, are not less remarkable for fine colouring. The damps, the creeping vegetables, and the seams in the marble and limestone parts of the rocks make as many tints as are seen in the rainbow, and are covered with a perpetual varnish from the just weeping springs that trickle from the roof. The curious in grottos, cascades, etc., might here obtain a just taste of nature. When we arrived at the mouth, and once more hailed all cheering daylight, I could not but admire the uncouth manner in which nature has thrown together those huge rocks which compose the arch over the entrance. But as if conscious of its rudeness, she has clothed it with trees and shrubs of the most various and beautiful verdure, which bend downwards, and with their leaves cover all the rugged parts of the rock. Not far from Lancaster, at the foot of an high hill, called Warton Crag, on the top of which was formerly a beacon, stands an agreeable little obscure town named Warton, upon the side of a lake, where is a good grammar school, with accommodations and a library for the benefit of the masters, which, together with an hospital for 6 poor men, was founded and endowed by Dr. Hutton, then Bishop of Durham, in 1594, who was afterwards translated to York, which certainly must have been then a see of very great value to have induced him to quit Durham for it, notwithstanding its being an archbishopric, and the title of grace annexed to its prelate. Here is also a very neat built church. Higher up north, towards the extremity of the county, next Westmoreland, is Hornby Castle, upon the River Lon, which is an excellent building, the seat of the Lords Monteagle, a branch of the Stanleys, and since of the Parkers, one of whom, marrying into that family, had, in King James I's time, the same title conferred upon him, and it was this nobleman who discovered the Powder Plot. This is now in the possession of Mr. Charteris, heir to the late Colonel Charteris, who left his estate to his second grandson. The castle is built on the summit of the hill, and the ground falls away so suddenly on every side that there is not the least flat about the building. This part of the county seemed very strange and dismal to us, nothing but mountains in view and stone walls for hedges, oatcakes for bread, or clapped bread as it is called. After coming from the south side, which is so rich and fertile that it is noted for showing the largest breed of cows and oxen in the kingdom, whose bulk as well as horns are of such a magnitude as is very astonishing, besides their fine spotted deer, which are said to be peculiar to that part of the county. They burn turf in this part of the county, which made us smell a town at a great distance. Here among the mountains our curiosity was frequently moved to inquire what high hill this was or that, and we soon were saluted with that old verse in Camden: Ingleborough, Pendle Hill, and Pennygent are the biggest hills between Scotland and Trent. Indeed they were all, in my judgment, of a stupendous height, but in a country all mountainous and full of high hills, it was not easy for a traveller to judge which was the highest. As these hills were lofty, so they had an aspect of terror. Here were no rich pleasant valleys between them as among the Alps, no coal pits as in the hills about Halifax, but all barren and wild, and of no use either to man or beast. But what renders these hills the more horrible is that, when great rains fall in the winter, the water brings down such quantities of large pebbles as to fill the lower grounds with them, where they lie in the hollow places many feet deep. Of Ingleborough Hill we shall subjoin the following account from a late traveller in those parts. Ingleborough is in the West Riding of Yorkshire. The westerly and northerly part of it lies in the parish of Bentham, the easterly in the parish of Horton in Ribblesdale, the southerly in the parish of Clapham. It is a mountain singularly eminent, whether you regard its height or the immense base upon which it stands. It is near 20 miles in circumference, and has Clapham, a church town, to the south, Ingleton to the west, Chapel in the Dale to the north, and Sellside, a small hamlet, to the east, from each of which places the rise in some parts is even and gradual, in others rugged and perpendicular. In this mountain rise considerable streams, which at length fall into the Irish Sea. The land round the bottom is fine fruitful pasture, interspersed with many acres of limestone rocks. As you ascend the mountain, the land is more barren, and under the surface is peat moss, in many places 2 or 3 yards deep, which the country people cut up and dry for burning instead of coal. As the mountain rises, it becomes more rugged and perpendicular, and is at length so steep that it cannot be ascended without great difficulty, and in some places not at all. In many parts there are fine quarries of slate, which the neighbouring inhabitants use to cover their houses. There are also many loose stones, but none of lime. Yet near the base none but limestones are to be found. The loose stones near the summit the people call Greetstone. The foot of the mountain abounds with fine springs on every side, and on the west there is a very remarkable one near the summit. The top is very level, but so dry and barren that it affords little grass, the rock being but barely covered with earth. It is said to be about a mile in circumference, and several persons now living say that they have seen races upon it. Upon that part of the top facing Lancaster and the Irish Sea, there are still to be seen the dimensions of an house, and the remains of what the country people call a beacon, which served in old time, as old people tell us, to alarm the country upon the approach of an enemy, a person being always kept there upon watch in the time of war, who was to give notice in the night by fire to other watchmen placed upon other mountains within view, of which there are many, particularly Whernside, Woefall, Camfell, Pennygent, and Pennel Hill. There are likewise discoverable a great many other mountains in Westmorland and Cumberland, besides the town of Lancaster, from which it is distant about 20 miles. The west and north sides are most steep and rocky. There is one part to the south where you may ascend on horseback, but whether the work of nature or art, I cannot say. A part of the mountain juts out to the north east near a mile, but somewhat below the summit. This part is called Park Fell. Another part juts out in the same manner, near a mile towards the east, and is called Simon Fell. There is likewise another part towards the south, called Little Ingleborough, the summits of all which are much lower than the top of the mountain itself. The springs towards the east all come together and fall into one of the holes called Allen Pot, and after passing under the earth about a mile they burst out again and flow into the river Ribble, whose head or spring is but a little further up the valley. West of Hornby Castle is a considerable tract of ground, which is part of this county, and runs north, parallel with the west side of Westmorland, and on the east of Cumberland. On the south it runs out in a promontory into the sea, and is called Furness. The approach to it from Lancaster has always been considered as dangerous, but it is less so now than formerly, the sands being more solid, and in company with the guides few accidents happen. From the Lancaster shore at Hurst Bank to Cartmel shore the sands are 9 miles over. The River Ken has its channel on these sands, and a guide on horseback is always waiting to conduct travellers over at the stated hours. Footnote: West's Antiquities of Furness, 4to, 1774. It contains, besides villages, 4 market towns: Cartmel, Dalton, Ulverston, and Hawkshead. Cartmel is a small town with most irregular streets, lying in a vale surrounded by high hills. The church is large and in the form of a cross. The steeple is most singular, the tower being a square within a square, the upper part set diagonally within the lower. The inside of the church is handsome and spacious, the centre supported by 4 large and fine clustered pillars, the west part more modern than the rest, and the pillars octagonal. The choir is beautiful, surrounded with stalls, whose tops and pillars are finely carved with foliage, and with the instruments of the Passion above. Dalton is likewise a small town. The castle is ancient, and in it are kept the records and prisoners for debt in the Liberty of Furness. Ulverston is seated near the waterside, and is approachable at high water by vessels of 150 tons. It has a trade in iron ore, pig and bar iron, limestone, oats and barley, and much beans, which last are sent to Liverpool for the food of the poor enslaved negroes in the Guinea trade. Numbers of cattle are sold out of the neighbourhood, but the commerce in general declines. At present there are not above 60 vessels belonging to the place, formerly about 150, mostly let out to freight, but both master and sailors go now to Liverpool for employ. Quantities of potatoes are raised here, and such is the increase that 450 bushels have been got from a single acre of ground. Furnaces abound in the neighbourhood of this place, where various sorts of implements of husbandry are made. From hence we travelled along a narrow glen, on excellent roads, amidst thick coppices or brushwood of various sorts of trees, many of them planted particularly for the use of the furnaces. They consist chiefly of birch and hazel. Not many years ago ships loaded with nuts were exported from hence. The woods are great ornaments to the country, for they creep high up the hills. The owners cut them down in equal portions, in the rotation of 16 years, and raise regular revenues out of them, and often superior to the rent of their land, for freeholders of £15 or £20 per annum are known to make constantly £60 a year from their woods. The furnaces for these last 60 years have brought a great deal of wealth into this country. From hence we reached the small town of Hawkshead, which is seated in a fertile bottom, but contains nothing remarkable. This county is very mountainous, and full of lakes or meres. The largest is Windermere, which makes the most northern bound of this tract of ground, and of this shire. It is famous for producing the char fish, which as a dainty is potted and sent far and near by way of present. I shall conclude this account of Furness with the description of Windermere as I find it among the observations of a modern traveller. Hutchinson's Excursions to the Lakes in Westmorland and Cumberland. The owner of the White Lion Inn at Bowness has a boat on the lake with which we were accommodated. This lake is very different from those of Cumberland, being in length about 12 computed miles, and not a mile in width in the broadest part. The hills seen around the lake, except those above Ambleside, are humble, the margin of the water is irregular and indented, and everywhere composed of cultivated lands, woods, and pastures, which descend with an easy fall down to the lake, forming a multitude of bays and promontories, and giving it the appearance of a large river. In the narrowest parts, not unlike the Thames below Richmond, on that part where Furness Fell forms the shore, the scene is more rude and romantic. The western side of this lake is in Lancashire, the eastern in Westmorland. As we sailed down from Bowness, we had two views which comprehended all the beauties of the lake. We rested upon the oars in a situation where, looking down the lake, we took in the prospect, the greatest extent of water. The shore was indented by woody promontories, which shot into the lake on each side to a considerable distance. To the right were the hills of Furness Fell, which are the highest that arise immediately from the water, consisting chiefly of rocks, which, though not rugged and deformed, have their peculiar beauty, being scattered over with trees and shrubs, each growing separate and distant. The brow of this rock overlooks a pretty peninsula on which the ferry-boat house stands, concealing its white front in a grove of sycamores. Whilst we were looking on it, the boat was upon its way, with several horse passengers, which greatly graced the scene. To the left, a small island, of a circular form, lay covered with a thicket of ash and birch wood, beyond which the hills that arose from the lake in gentle ascents to the right were covered with rich herbage and irregular groves. On the left side of the lake, enclosures of meadow sweeping gently away from the water lay bounded by a vast tract of woods, and overtopped with hills of moorish ground and heath. The most distant heights which formed the background were fringed with groves, over which they lifted their brown eminences in various shapes. Upwards on the lake we looked on a large island of about 30 acres of meagre pasture ground in an irregular oblong figure. Here and there some misshapen oak trees bend their crooked branches on the sandy brinks, and one little grove of sycamores shelters a cottage. The few natural beauties of this island are wounded and distorted by some ugly rows of firs set in right lines, and by the works now carrying on by Mr. English, the proprietor, who is laying out gardens on a square plan, building fruit walls, and preparing to erect a mansion house. The want of taste is a misfortune too often attending the architect. The romantic sight of this place on so noble a lake and surrounded with such scenes requires the finest imagination and most finished judgment to design the plan of an edifice and pleasure grounds. But instead of that, to see a Dutch burgomaster's palace arise, and a cabbage garth extend its bosom to the east, squared and cut out at right angles, is so offensive to the traveller's eye that he turns away in disgust. I would overlook this misshapen object whilst I view the lake upwards with its environs. The beautiful crags of Furness Fell, over which trees are dispersed in an agreeable wildness, form the front ground on the left, and by their projection cover the hills which are further advanced towards the head of the lake, which makes a curve bearing from the eye. 3 small woody islands of a fine circular figure, swelling to a crown in their centres, arise from out the lake, and with the deep verdure of their trees give an agreeable taint to the azure hue the water received from reflection of the serene sky above. Over an expanse of water, in length 6 miles and near a mile in breadth, shining and bright as a mirror, we viewed the agreeable variety of the adjacent country. To the right, woodlands and meadows, in many little peninsulas and promontories, descended with easy slopes to the brink of the lake, where Bowness Church and its cottages arose above the trees, beyond which laid the seat of Fletcher Fleming, Esquire, situate on the brink of the lake, and covered on every side with rich woodland. Further were cots and villages dispersed on the rising ground. In front stood Ambleside, and at the opening of the deep vale of Rydale the house of Sir Michael Fleming, shielded on either hand by a wing of hanging forests climbing up the steeps of the mountains. The nearest background to the right is composed of an eminence called Orresthead, rising gradually to a point, and cultivated to its crown, which sweet mount is contrasted by the vicinage of the crags of Biscuit Hoe, which overtopped the extensive woodlands of Mr. Fleming. Then Troutbeck Parks arrive, where the hills begin to increase in magnitude and form the range of mountains which are extended to Keswick, diversified with pasturage, dells, and cliffs, looking over which Langdon Pikes, 3 mountains rising in perfect cones, extend their heads, surmounted only by the rocky and barren brow of Kirsten Fell, whose cliffs overlook the whole. The Lake of Windermere differs very much from those of Ullswater and Keswick. Here almost every object in view on the whole lake confesses cultivation. The islands are numerous, but small and woody, and rather bear a resemblance to the artificial circles raised on gentlemen's ponds for their swans. The great island is little better than a bank of sand, and is now under the despoiling hand of a deformer. The innumerable promontories are composed of fine meadow ground and ranges of trees. The hills, except Furness Fell and those above Ambleside, are tame, and on every hand a vast expanse of woodland is stretched upon the view. The paintings of Poussin describe the nobleness of Ullswater. The works of Salvator Rosa express the romantic and rocky scenes of Keswick, and the tender and elegant touches of Claude Lorraine and Smith pencil forth the rich variety of Windermere. The greatest depth of Windermere, we were told, was not more than 40 fathom. The water abounds in pike, trout, char, eels, and perch. The lake, whilst we visited it, was covered with the boats of fishing parties, it being customary for the country people after their hay harvest to make their days of jubilee in that diversion. Between Hornby Castle and Kirby Lonsdale, at a small distance from the public road, stands Overborough, the seat of Robert Fenwick, Esquire, which was a famous station of Antoninus, called Bremerton Acum. The military way is still to be traced from Ribchester, the Rigodunum or Coccium of the ancients, to Bremerton Acum or Overborough. The house is built of stone, and has a regular handsome front to the road from London. The park is enclosed with a stone wall, and there are some noble plantations made by the possessor, which are in as flourishing a condition as any in the kingdom. Lancashire, as hath been said, is a county palatine, and its principal town gave title of Duke to a branch of the royal family. Until the 2 Roses, the white and the red, were united by the marriage of Henry VII of the Lancaster line with Elizabeth, heiress of the House of York, these 2 branches, by their different pretensions to the crown, gave occasion to the wars and confusions which for many years made England a scene of blood and desolation. 3 successive princes, Henry IV, V, and VI, were of the Lancaster line, and the latter lost his crown and his life, as did the princely son, to Edward IV of the House of York, whose 2 sons being murdered by their uncle Richard III, and he himself killed at Bosworth Field, the Lancaster line was again restored in Henry VII. There are not above 70 parishes in this extensive county. Consequently many of them are very large, insomuch that there are above 120 chapels of ease, no less than 16 of which are in one parish. End of Part 6.